Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About It. On today's episode, I've got some information for you about the infamous Alcatraz Federal Prison located in the San Francisco Bay on Alcatraz Island, which is less of an island and more of a massive rock, hence the prison's name, The Rock. Not that one. So, between August 11th, 1934 and March 21st, 1963, Alcatraz operated as a federal prison, but previous to this it was used as a military prison. With that in mind, it's no surprise that the building is made of thick concrete and tool-proof steel, and of course has all of the security measures in place that you'd expect to see inside of a prison. However, it is the prison's location on the San Francisco Bay that has given it the reputation of being inescapable, because for any inmate able to escape the prison itself, they then have to deal with the water that surrounds the island. Because this water is freezing cold, there are really strong currents, it's a long way from the shore, and there are myths that there are great white sharks that patrol the area. But despite these factors, 34 prisoners over the time that Alcatraz was operating attempted to escape. Whilst most were officially unsuccessful, either being recaptured or dying as a result of gunfire or drowning in the San Francisco Bay, there are 3 men who escaped the prison and were never found again. These men are brothers John and Clarence Anglin and their fellow inmate Frank Morris, who together chiseled a hole in a wall, slipped through it, and then set off into the San Francisco Bay on a raft made from stolen raincoats. Now, as ludicrous as that may seem, the question comes up of how did they avoid the guards? And what they did was quite ingenious, because they made paper mache heads, painted them, gave them human hair, and left them in their beds. So when the guards came past, all they saw were 3 inmates sleeping soundly. Now, whilst the 3 men were never officially found, dead or alive, the prison stuck to its story that the 3 men had drowned in the bay, but there is evidence out there to suggest that the 3 men had survived their escape plan. And of course, a prison as famous as Alcatraz had some famous prisoners. These included people such as Robert Franklin Stroud, aka the Birdman, who had managed to manipulate the media and the general public into believing that he was some sort of heroic figure who should be freed, when in reality he was an unrepentant killer. Another inmate is Alvin Francis Carpowitz, nicknamed Creepy Carpus due to his sinister smile. Alvin was the leader of the Barker Gang, who were known for committing vicious bank robberies, and he spent the longest sentence of anyone ever at Alcatraz, with a total of 25 years. The famed George Machine Gun Kelly was another inmate of Alcatraz, and he served his time there after being arrested for bootlegging and the kidnapping of a wealthy businessman. Now, despite his reputation, it is said that Machine Gun repented for what he did, and that he wrote his victim a letter of apology, but received no reply. And then we have probably the prison's most famous inmate, and that is of course the gangster Al Capone. So when Capone was locked up in other prisons, he had a fairly easy life because he was able to bribe guards into giving him certain privileges. But when he arrived at Alcatraz, Al Capone quickly realised that he would not be given any kind of special treatment, and he is quoted as saying, "It looks like Alcatraz has got me licked." Off the back of this, the gangster became a model prisoner and was so compliant that he was given the privilege of playing the banjo in the jailhouse band known as the Rock Islanders. Whilst Al Capone's level of compliance was expected of all prisoners of Alcatraz, it also stretched to the visitors that came to the prison. Once a month, warden-agreed visits would take place, but under very strict rules. There was to be no physical contact between prisoners and visitors at all, and conversations were not allowed to include anything to do with current affairs or life inside the prison itself. Anyone caught breaking these rules would have their visitation rights stripped from them for the rest of their stay. But visitors to the prison weren't the only civilians on the island, because at any given time there was approximately 300 members of the guards' families that lived on the island. And despite this seeming like a somewhat unorthodox living arrangement, it was just a common fact that if you worked at Alcatraz, you lived on Alcatraz Island. And of course, to make life on the island as comfortable as possible for the civilians, they had access to a bowling alley, convenience stores, a soda fountain shop, and there was a ferry that would take them to and from the mainland throughout the day. Now, despite them living on a relatively isolated island that they shared with some hardened criminals, the civilian safety was never put in any real jeopardy. However, the same cannot be said for the guards and the inmates themselves who lived and worked within the walls of Alcatraz. And the most severe example of this is what became known as the Alcatraz Blastout, or the Battle of Alcatraz. This situation took place between the 2nd and the 4th of May 1946 after a failed escape attempt by 6 prisoners who had managed to arm themselves with weapons from the gun galley. After their plan hit a roadblock, the 6 prisoners decided to fight their way out, and to do that they took 9 guards hostage, which then led to a shootout with military, police and other guards, which resulted in grenades being thrown into the prison, continuous back and forth gunfire, which ultimately saw 3 of the prisoners dead and 3 of them surrendering. The battle also resulted in 14 guards being seriously injured and 1 losing his life. As you would expect, there were severe punishments handed down to the 3 would-be escapees, with one of them being given 99 years on his sentence and the other 2 being executed. However, these executions couldn't take place at Alcatraz itself because the prison wasn't equipped for it. But that is not to suggest that the prison didn't have its own forms of brutal punishment that gave it the nickname of Devil's Island. These include the use of a set of cells known as the Spanish dungeons below the prison itself, which was said to be cold and wet in total darkness, where prisoners would be given very little food, had no toilet, had no bed, and would often be chained up for days at a time. Now, there is no official evidence to suggest that these cells were actually used when the building was being run as a prison. However, the phrase "no smoke without fire" springs to mind. Then we have cell block D, which was used to house some of the more unruly prisoners. And within cell block D was the feared strip cell. This was a still room with 0 light, a thin mattress on the floor, and a hole in the ground that the inmate would use as a toilet. And to add to the control factor of this room, the flush for it was controlled by a guard on the outside. And the strip cell was said to be so bad that after 1 or 2 days, in between the regular beatings the inmates would receive, they would be begging to be let back out again. Now, whilst you might expect that kind of treatment to happen at a place like Alcatraz, there was another more surprising form of torture that the inmates were subjected to. And this punishment was said to be so severe that it was put to a stop a couple of years after Warden James A. Johnston first introduced it in 1934. And this punishment was called the Order of Silence, which basically forbid prisoners from speaking or being spoken to. And the impact on inmates' mental health was said to be so severe as a result of the Order of Silence that it led to people going insane. And a notable example of this is of an inmate called Ruth Percival, who was driven so crazy by the silence that he ended up cutting off his own fingers. Well guys, that brings me to the end of another video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, please hit the like button. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.